Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the 2018 MacBook Air and see how this particular MacBook still holds up in 2025. Now, I will definitely tell you, in my personal opinion, the 2018 MacBook Air was such a tremendous, upgrade in every single way than the previous generation of MacBook Airs that we had before it. And I remember personally when I was going through, I think it was in 2017 or 2016, I was looking for a new MacBook and I was highly thinking about a MacBook Air. But the number one complaint that I saw from a majority of people on Reddit was basically, why buy a MacBook Air, right? It's portable, it's nice, it's good, but the display itself was the biggest problem. Every single person I saw complained about the MacBook Air. And fast forward to 2018, Apple went through, took that feedback, and they really greatly improved this particular MacBook's display. They gave it a Retina display, and the difference between the previous generation of MacBooks before this, and specifically this 2018 one, it was a very, very big upgrade for sure. So now looking at it, I'm very excited to kind of see how this thing compares. Now, if you want to go ahead and pick up this MacBook, or some other MacBooks I'd rather recommending this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get this MacBook from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now what's funny is that when you make your way over to Apple's website on their MacBook Compare page, it seems to me that they have like every single other MacBook available except this one. You can't actually see that this MacBook was ever made by Apple on their Compare page, which is really weird. But luckily when you type in 2018 MacBook Air, that information still comes up. On the exterior of this MacBook, on the top portion, you still have that Apple logo and this really nice build quality. This 2018 MacBook Air still looks very good. It was very, very thin. And luckily you were still getting this type of MacBook that felt very premium even against the Pro model MacBooks of that time. The few things to keep in mind here though was that Apple didn't really change this particular MacBook design for a couple generations until they made like the flat-sided MacBook Air. But number two, there was only ever one model of this MacBook Air. There was just this 13.3 inch model. Apple has gone through and they have basically made two different versions of the MacBooks. So there's the MacBook Air 13-inch model, then the 15-inch model. This one only ever came out in one particular size, which I think is still totally fine. I'm totally okay with having that type of MacBook layout. Now, when you take a look at the port selection, this type of MacBook, for the most part, still has, about the same type of ports that you'd expect from really a majority of other, Macs of this type of size. You were getting two different USB Type-C ports on the left side. Now, they were Thunderbolt, so you could go through and basically plug them into different Thunderbolt displays and Thunderbolt accessories, but that was something that was really cool. You were also getting the headphone jack on the other side. Now, the interesting thing here was because of the way this MacBook Air was designed, it started off at a thicker point and it slowly got into a thinner point right after. That was always something that was so cool by Apple. I always loved that type of design. It looked so cool. And I remember when I bought my first MacBook Air, it was really nice. And when they made these Retina ones, they really changed out the design quite a bit. It's a really big difference. Now, you are still getting the headphone jack inside of this MacBook Air as well, which is still always cool to have. And when I'm looking at this type of MacBook, I really like the way this design feels. It's a tapered off edge type of Mac. It looks great. It feels great. And I definitely will tell you, if you're going to go through and pick up a MacBook Air, this type of design for the most part still looks pretty good, right? Now, flipping this thing open, this is where things get even more interesting. The biggest upgrade, or one of the biggest upgrades coming from the previous generation of Macs, was that display. This type of display, for the most part, looked really, really good. It was a, Retina display. I think it was 2560 by 1600, which is a massive size resolution. I think before it was like 750p or something like that. So the fact that this thing got that big of a jump was insane in my personal opinion. So that right there was something that was really, really cool. And they pushed out the screen bezels a little bit more too. The thing with the previous generation of MacBook Airs was that Apple basically put these really thick bezels on these Macs. Luckily, when they made this MacBook Air, they pushed out the bezel a little bit more, so they pushed it out, and it looked pretty much just like a MacBook Pro. Like if you're looking at this MacBook Air's display, even in 2018, this display still looks very good. So like I said before, I think that's a very important thing to kind of keep in mind here. Now, once again, if you're going to go through and pick up a device, you are going to have a really good type of device when it comes down to this thing. So I think from that side in and of itself too, this type of display is easily one of the best types of assets for it. But then we get to probably one of the worst areas of this Mac right below it, the keyboard. Now, this keyboard, the butterfly keyboard on every single MacBook, not just the MacBook Air, but the MacBook Pro, the first MacBook, the 12-inch model they made that one time. There were a lot of different MacBooks that had that type of like keyboard inside of it. And that was a very big issue that a lot of people were experiencing, including for a lot of people who made these types of Macs and you were using them. Like the fact that you were going through and having that type of keyboard with that butterfly keyboard, the issue with these butterfly keyboards was that they would go through and they would essentially just, the biggest problem was that they would just fail all the time. Random keys would stop working, the spacebar would give issues. It was just a mess. Apple had to make this like service repair program. So if anybody ever had any Macs that were giving you those types of problems, they would go ahead and fix it for free, which was very nice of them to do. But that would require you to go ahead and actually ship the MacBook and having to deal with it. It should have never happened in the first place. So fast forward to now, most MacBooks nowadays, they do not have this type of butterfly keyboard. They now have these like thick size keyboards with actual buttons that don't fail at all, mostly. So that was a really big upgrade. Unfortunately, with these MacBooks, the 2018 ones, you still had those butterfly keyboards. Now, if you ended up getting one that Apple fixed, maybe it wouldn't have that problem anymore. And I think Apple did end up upgrading it at some point, but Apple didn't actually fully go through and upgrade this whole entire system of keyboard until the 2020 MacBook Air. So that right there was another very big thing in and of itself. And I do think if you were going to go through and like pick up a Mac, that could be one of the biggest turnoffs for you. Now, while we're here, some other big things to kind of keep in mind here too is the performance. Now, this thing had that Intel chipset inside. A majority of Macs nowadays that Apple's made they created their Apple Silicon with their M series of chipsets, and it was a really big performance upgrade. So if you were going to go through and pick up this MacBook, more than just the design, because the design still looks great on this Mac, it's the performance inside. You're tapped out at 8 gigs of RAM, basically, that you're going to probably use this thing if you get that option. And number two, this thing's Intel chipset inside is very outdated. It's a very slow Mac. The biggest change that this Mac experienced was the design, right? It was the exterior. But internally, it still kind of is that same type of Mac. So if you're planning on buying this Mac and using it on an everyday basis of writing papers and, maybe doing some video editing, playing some games here and there, you're really going to have a limited experience on this type of Mac because it's just not going to really be that great of an experience. And I, for one, again, I would hate for you to go and buy this Mac. If you were to go and pick one up, that would be kind of like if you wanted to use on an everyday basis, it's going to be outdated with software very soon. Yes, it's very lightweight. It's very easy to kind of take around with you. But if you're watching this far, I think there's another Mac that you could buy that's still fairly cheap in today's standards. And it's newer than this thing. It's way better than this thing. And that is the M1 MacBook Air. That M1 MacBook Air that came out like 2 years after this Mac, that is a very, very good upgrade in my personal opinion from this type of device. From that type of Mac, you're going to be getting a device that performs really well, that looks very good. And with that one, you're getting a faster Mac with just more capability. I think getting a device like that would make a lot more sense to go and pick up rather than this thing. And for me personally, like I said, if I'm going to go through and pick up a Mac, this is not the one. The 2018 one is not the one I would buy. The 2020 M1 MacBook Air is going to be giving you better chipset, better keyboard, just better capability, just faster device. It makes a lot more sense to go and buy a Mac like that rather than this one. So in my personal opinion, I really wouldn't recommend buying the 2018 MacBook Air anymore, but it was a really good Mac when it first came out. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.